Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for making time to have a chat today. As usual, it's going to be really informal. It's really nice to see you all. Just for those who are perhaps watching for the first time, my name is Sam Hall. I'm co-founder and managing director of UMA. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise, and we work in Wales to create the conditions where the people of Wales have access to exceptional care. And part of the way that we do that is to work with cluster leads, and we have the privilege of hosting the All Wales Cluster Lead Group. So my role today here is to really host a conversation between three colleagues. And really our intention today is to start a series of conversations about the Accelerated Cluster Development Programme, and to hear from cluster leads on the ground around how the programme is actually materialising in their communities. So we'll be chatting for around about half an hour. And I think before we get into the detail, it'd be really good to hear from colleagues in the virtual room. So I'll invite the three cluster leads to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their clusters. So I'll probably kick off with Eilir.
Hi, thanks for the welcome, Sam. So I'm Eilir Hughes. I'm a GP on the Llyn Peninsula at the surgery in Nevin. So my cluster is Davies, so it's the cluster in the far northwest of Wales. It's predominantly a rural cluster, approximately 35,000 people. We expanded a couple of years ago. I think it was just before the pandemic, or as that was kicking off. And the reason for that was because we felt it was important that the cluster footprint matched the CRT footprint that we had locally. So that's kind of, think of that as the operational footprint for the health and social care delivery locally in the county of Gwynedd. So that was a big change, because what that meant was that our cluster expanded from 5 practices to 7 practices. Since then, 2 practices have merged, so in total there's 6 practices, and of the 6, 2 of them are health board run practices, which of course brings its own challenges, its own sort of different dynamics going on. And I think since the clusters have existed, to be honest, and before my time, the focus has been predominantly on survival to a degree. Sustainability is often the focus of the approach that we've had to take, unfortunately. But our challenges are shared across, the patch of Wales, where we've, difficulties, particularly with recruiting staff. I'd also like to mention the challenges, the specific challenges we've got in terms of the higher burden of the elderly. We've got a higher level of, according to our population, to the if you compare it to the general population, number of retirees that come into the area from elsewhere. And also the summer pressures, as we call it, a huge influx of people come in over the school holidays. So it's not just summer, it's Easter, it's Thanksgiving week, and that obviously puts its own challenges on our acute community-led services. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you, Eilir. And I'll head over to Susan from Cardiff.
Yeah, thank you. Morning, everybody. Yeah, so my name is Susan Davies, and I'm a non-clinical cluster lead, which in fact I've got a practice management background, and I've been in post in Cardiff West for 6 months now. Cardiff West is just under 60,000 population, 7 practices. We have an interesting range. Like you, we have a high elderly population. We have some areas which would be regarded as affluent, and 1 or 2 where there are pockets that need more assistance. I would agree that sustainability is one of the main focuses. The Cardiff Local Development Plan means that there's a new village being built on the outskirts of Rada. Some 7,000 homes are going there, so our population is possibly going to increase by something like 20-25% in the next 10 years. So where do these people register? Where, what footprint do we have? Do we have the capacity to manage them? How do we recruit to get them in? The money follows the registrations, so there's lots of issues around that. And the cluster is very much looking at how we manage that with the help of the health board. Our focus mainly is on pharmacists, and that's where most of our budget goes. So how we move that with our new professional colleagues joining us will be an interesting conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. And lastly, Annabelle.
Hi, I'm Annabelle Holtam. I'm a GP in South Monmouthshire, Chepstow, and I'm also cluster lead for South Monmouthshire. So pretty similar, actually. We have a population of about 50,000 patients. We're sort of small towns to lots of rural areas. We cover big, wide rural areas as well. It's quite a wide farming community, and we have an increasingly elderly population. Also, since the staycation in the UK is becoming the thing, Monmouthshire is a beautiful county, lovely countryside, and it's become quite a popular place to come. Lots of yurts and things building everywhere. So I think we might start experiencing our own summer or spring pressures, beginning to see it a bit. I don't know if that's going to change with people being able to travel more now, but I think it might become something that we're going to need to think about. So yeah, in terms of practices, we've 5 practices. We haven't changed areas recently. We're a fairly settled cluster, I would say. But all the different challenges as cluster lead and as a GP in the area remain. Sustainability has always been something that we've had to look at, but much the last 2 years, finding GP recruitment particularly very challenging. And I think change often happens when we're forced sometimes, and I think we are in that position now that we need to perhaps rethink how we keep ourselves sustainable. And I suppose accelerated cluster development, for example, is fitting into that. So we're in a time of change. We've done many projects, but we're looking to the future and how we need to develop and adapt probably quite rapidly, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for introducing yourselves. And it's I mean, I'd say it's curated, but it's a complete happy accident that we have got, you know, representation in the room today from across Wales, and also quite different areas, you know, demographic and socioeconomic areas. So I think we can have a really great and rich conversation. So part of why we're having these conversations is to start to create some visibility and highlight what accelerated cluster development actually means for clusters on the ground. And so I'd really be grateful if we could spend about 15 minutes touching on actually what it means for you. So the program itself, I know that Alan and the team have been working on this for over a year now, but has officially, I suppose, launched in the new financial year, so in April, so is well underway. So I'm really curious to understand what this means for you as a cluster lead, for your community, but also for your constituent kind of partners, the people that you work with in your cluster, your professional partners. So what it actually means for you right now, and I suppose what is changing, if anything. And it's okay if nothing's changing, because as Alan has talked about a lot, this is a transitional year, so transition takes time. But if something is changing, or you have some immediate aspirations, what is your focus right now in terms of ACD? I'll kind of pause for a moment. I don't know who would like to start, and then I can facilitate from there.
Well, I kind of see ACD as almost going back to the very beginning, when the focus of when clusters were first envisaged was that we would have representation from different professional colleagues. And I think in some clusters that was mature and has happened, but in others it's simply been the GPs who attend. Our cluster is GP led, and so I see in the next quarter and 6 months, the change for me as a lead is to think, right, what does the cluster now look like? Who should be coming? And that's the question that we've asked the health board. What's been prescribed or is mandatory as a membership, if any, for the cluster? And what will it look like? So for the first 3 months, I'm trying to think, right, who should come? we have our community pharmacist. How do I look at for the council, the social services, the third sector? I need to include them, and then maybe by September, the Holtam will be on board. We're hoping then, and then maybe by the end of the financial year, will I see the dentists coming? I don't know. I think that, but probably because I like certainty. So this transition year doesn't fit with the way I sit, but I'm learning to live with it. But I've got goals for the end of each quarter, or targets to see where am I and what's working and what isn't, and where are my gaps.
And Susan, just to build on that a bit, just to kind of understand a little bit more about your experience before we move on to others. So you talked about seeking guidance from the health board, and you've talked a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts of how this is actually going to work in terms of membership. Can you talk to us a little bit about your interaction with the health board today? Because I know that's something that is going to vary across Wales. So how has the health board brought you into the conversation so far?
Well, they've been very proactive. We have a weekly CD focus meeting by teams. It's not just primary care. There's some secondary care people and health board people come to that. And the conversations have been very much around what will it look like? As I say, what's prescribed, what isn't, where are we going by when? And we've had a workshop where the GPs were invited and the practice managers for the whole of Cardiff and Vale. And as much information as we've got has been shared. And as more is coming out, then they intend to issue FAQs for our guidance and for the guidance of the practices. And they've done, Cardiff and Vale have done work with the practice managers as well in their forum. So the information is out there. Just by way, perhaps, of a gap, I've had a conversation with a community pharmacy representative, and he's expressed concern that they're not in the loop as to what ACD looks like. So that may be something that we need to have a further chat with the board about, what communication is going with them.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting to hear. And I think that then brings me on to one of the questions I'm holding, which is in this transition is the creation of collaboratives and how the creation of the 4 professional collaboratives and the existing cluster lead governance process and how that then kind of morphs into what is this new world. So before we come on to, because I know we've only got a short period of time to chat, but has the ACD program changed the way that you are doing cluster work right now? So in terms of your projects, has that actually made any difference to doing the cluster day-to-day job so far?
Not at the moment, but you can see that it will do. Questions are being asked about budget, for example, as the 2 other collaboratives come in. They will bring significantly more patients with them. Will that affect and increase our budget? And you're thinking, like, what can we do that will involve 4 quite different professional groups, whilst we all look after the same practice population in different ways?
Really interesting. Thank you, Susan. So I'm going to move on now. Does Annabelle, would you like to?
Yeah, I can. So yeah, I suppose what I was saying before is we were looking at sustainability and what sustainability looks like. Historically, that's looked like pharmacists coming into practices, which has been really good. But I kind of wanted to move on from where do we go from there? And does sustainability always look like a workforce on site, was the question. Is it just put more and more people in the practices, take up more practice space? And do we always want to be the answer in primary care? And the same goes for the integrated service teams, etc. Should health be the answer for every one of life's problems? And I think we think no, and we think we over-medicalise sometimes. We don't mean to as doctors, but sometimes people fall into a pathway, whether that's because they've had a fall at home or they've got stress at home for various reasons, because life happens. So what we wanted, and this is pre-accelerated cluster development, but perhaps gives an example of how it works for us, is that we wanted to look at building up teams outside of primary care that could help support people and take some pressure off. You know, we've developed psychological wellbeing practitioners that come into the practices and can see for low-level mental health problems, but now they communicate and work with link workers that work outside of the practice and meet in community hubs. So that's stuff we can do in partnership with Monmouth County Council. So we're sort of getting there, but I feel like there's so much more we could do to help people feel more resilient in how they cope with life and challenges that come to them, and also find other pathways. Often the stuff that's available to people is just available remotely. And this is very much just what we're doing. And that's what I really love about this, that we can all go off, you know, all different cluster leads can have different solutions here because every area is different. We're really fortunate in Monmouth County Council and Monmouthshire in general. There's a lot of community stuff that I'm trying to work out how we link into. And so how that fits to accelerated cluster development is that I feel like we need as much autonomy and agility as possible to kind of develop these roles. I also feel like we need to combine budgets. There's a lot of overlap in what I'm doing with what Monmouth County Council might be doing, what the voluntary sector's doing, third sector are doing. So how can we work better together to achieve that? Accelerated cluster development for me gives that infrastructure and gives suggestions for how we do that. We were already doing it a bit already. We already had our integrated service partnership board. I have to say we have a very well attended, and that's my predecessor meetings. That they never really were GP meetings, and that was never the format really, I think, for an Iron Bevan type areas. But it's how to develop that further and get more people involved, but making it constructive. Having a lot of people in the room doesn't actually mean that you achieve what you want. People that are there just because they've been invited, but don't feel the authority to influence or comment, doesn't, you know, so it's ensuring that everyone understands their role. It's ensuring everyone has a voice, but also that we're doing something meaningful and not just ticking a box, that this is developing projects and plans. And I think that's how I see it as accelerated. I see it as us saying, you know, instead of we've got a budget, anyone got any ideas and it's spent for the year, this is about planning infrastructure for the future. And this is really reference to me, not to other clusters. Everyone else is probably doing it, but I wanted to make it that there's a master plan, and it's like papier-mâché, you know, that everything you're putting in complements what's already there and grows it and makes it bigger and stronger in some way, rather than lots of little mini projects that have some meaning but collectively are no more than the sum of their parts. I want something that's bigger than lots of little projects. So yeah, I see accelerated cluster development as a way that we can kind of work with all our teams. You know, for what it means for what we're doing, we're forming a community interest company, Wild Orchid Wellbeing. It's got a name now, and we're hoping to incorporate it soon. But the idea is that we can then share budgets, share ideas across the different groups. We're looking at directors from GP practices, but also from the council and voluntary organisation as well. The main effort is to have that agility, ability to combine budgets, and also have people from all sorts of different areas being able to shape things, understanding it from their angle, and making sure that they think these things work. It's got to be in the interest of the South, well, it could be the full Monmouthshire community. So that's how I see it going. I think accelerated cluster development just gave me the impetus to get on with it, and also to understand how it could work. And I think it's really helpful, because I think you could end up just trying to go alone. And I think that would be much, much harder. I think having this infrastructure behind and support is really important. But the message I say to anyone, I think it's just, for me, accelerated cluster development, at least from our end, is accepting we have issues, but trying to look at how we can resolve them in a different way. If the normal models that we usually used to work so well just can't access anymore, we've got to find something different. So yeah, that's from my part.
Has it primarily been driven by yourselves in the cluster, or have you had really good partnership with either the local authority or the health board, or even both? I mean, yeah, if you could sort of give us a bit of information about that, because I feel at the moment we're not in that zone. We have aspirations perhaps to get there in the future, but I just don't feel we're sort of around the same table on that matter yet here.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I guess it's been driven by me. In the sense that I met with Sam, we got the idea, we've got my NCN team are involved, supportive, and practices took discussion and it took a while for them to understand what it is. And I'm more than happy at a later date just to sit with you and go through the practicalities for your practices and for anyone else that's being involved. We've got support from the health board, though. We got some funding to do it. They were really keen, the health board, in principle, that we got something going, so that we did have support there. We worked with Welsh Cooperative, but you could choose whoever you could take advice on that. Alan, Laurie and Sam have been really helpful and supportive as well. So yeah, it sort of came, I guess, from me asking for it, but I haven't felt that that's been a challenge to get this far anyway. So far so good. It can look, the thought of being a director of a company when we're GPs, it can look a bit intimidating from the outside, but actually now I understand it better. It's not a million miles away from what we do as an ENCN, but we can access funding externally from the health board money as well. So I just felt like this is in the best interests for the South Monmouthshire community. That was my view. Yeah.
Thanks, Annabelle. So Eilir, yeah, just building on that question then, do you want to share a little bit about what your experience is up in the Llyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've got in our favour is that we've got some good sort of individuals, teams, community teams. Sort of we work closely together on that CRT footprint anyway. But it's that next step of formalising processes and funding is the big key, where we've found a huge amount of frustration so far with cluster working. And I think, my hope with this development is that we'll finally all, and when I say all, I mean throughout the sort of the health economy, not just in primary care, that we all finally get that same hymn sheet that we're all singing from. Because that's been one of my biggest frustrations, is that I try and sort of explain and sort of fly the flag for primary care, but sometimes you feel that nobody's kind of listening. Or they might listen, but they feel powerless, that they can't do anything about it. And I think, I mean, in terms of reservations that we might have, you touched upon it before. You might risk getting too many partners in the room, and that it becomes effectively a talking shop. I hope that in time, that sort of contractual obligation, that motivation to engage and be constructive will come for the partners, because obviously it's there for GP surgeries, isn't it? There's a contractual obligation to it, but I hope there's going to be kind of something like that in the future for the new groups that come through, because I think the reservation then is that you might have a two-tier system, those that contractually oblige and those that not, and that can cause conflict. And you just haven't got time to deal with that. We need to crack on. What else do I think we need to think about? I mean, in terms of North Wales, I guess it's a big health board, and we work operationally, from the sort of middle management of the health board across 3 areas, so split by west, centre, and east. And the feeling I'm getting from talking to colleagues across the patch, across North Wales, is that there's greater discussions in some areas than others. In my area, I think there's less, just because we've accepted that there's a lot of uncertainty, and until we got more uncertainty, we feel like, well, let's just park it for a moment until we hear more. So, for instance, this afternoon now we have our North Wales cluster leads meeting, and we've got the senior health manager of a health board coming in to give us a talk actually about cluster development. So if we were having this conversation later on today, I might have a bit more information to give you, but that gives you a real-time idea of where we are with cluster development here in North Wales.
Brilliant. And I think it is really important to be able to acknowledge that the pace is going to be different, and the motivation before accelerated cluster development would have been different. So it's to be expected that things will move at a slightly different pace. Excuse me. So I think in the next few minutes before we wrap up, it would be really great. I mean, if you're up for it, it'd be good to talk again in a couple of months to kind of see what's changed. So imagine that we are a couple of months hence, and what are you hoping you'll be telling me about? So what's your kind of immediate focus? And maybe Eilir, I might come straight back to you if that's all right. you'll have this meeting this afternoon. It'll all be clear. So what's going to happen in the next couple of months then for you?
I think the immediate thing we'd want to know is sort of assurances really of our current cluster projects, what's going to happen to them in terms of the funding, because we've put those projects forward for the few years in mind. So I think we need that reassurance and a clarity as to what will happen. Then I think the current cluster members, the GPs primarily, will be asking, I'm sure, what sort of influence will these new partners have on any new funding that comes, and that interplay between the contractual obligation again of engaging in the new cluster format or whatever it'll be called. I think that's a delicate issue, but it has to be dealt with sooner the better, I think, because otherwise it can really pull the carpet underneath you right at the very beginning of developing this.
Right. Thanks, Eilir. Susan, what would good look like for you in a couple of months' time?
In a couple of months' time, I think I'd like to have a firm idea of what the new cluster representation will look like. I might even have had my first cluster meeting, maybe with not everybody, but with somebody. I think we need to get our terms of reference maybe in place, and also to look at our own roles, to look at the cluster lead roles. Do the job descriptions need to be revisited? And the amount of time that's being asked of us. So not only are we going to have our 4 GP collaborative meetings, we'll have cluster meetings. How many will they be? And I believe that there is a representation from each cluster being requested at the pan-cluster groups. So what's the time commitment to that? So there's a lot of the cluster leads in our area are asking where are we going? What's being asked of us? And is it being funded? And to flip that as well, what support will we need to make our clusters work in terms of administration, and who's paying for it? Because I did this job in CTM, so I'm aware that there's 2 different funding models applied, and maybe there needs to be a bit of consistency about that. And how much time will our support staff need to drive this forward?
Thanks, Susan. Annabelle.
Okay, there's a few things. I'm just in the process of reorganising the sort of infrastructure, so we're sharpening up the ISPB terms of reference to make it as effective as possible. It needs to be the decision maker, so we need to have a feedback loop. I've developed and had an informal mini ISPB that meets weekly, so that's with Monmouth County Council, voluntary sector and things. That arguably some of the most effective meetings are in that, because like Eilis alluded to as well, you've got lots of people sometimes, rather than this is a small let's get things done group that needs to be, you don't have time in these big ISPB meetings to discuss everything, so we need to sort of sharpen it up, come back with what we need and what we want. So I want to sort out that infrastructure, and then fit in the GP collaborative meetings. We call them NCNs, but they're not anymore. There's a collaborative meeting. So just sharpen those up as well. So I want this to be a sort of constant circuit of decision making and progression and stock checks as we go. It's sort of there, but it's not quite as, I know it's not a business, but I want it that kind of business type feel to it, that we're making decisions, that if we're taking up people's time to come to these meetings, that they are influencing and things are changing and they can see they're changing, things are happening. Often the moment of change when you introduce the new role is 6 months of work prior to it that you don't see but happens in these, but I want to see that work happening. We may or may not be incorporated as a community interest company. It's a road with bumps, I suspect, and curveballs and things as we go along, as we discover new things as we go. So potentially 2 months, I think that might be tight for me, but I'd hope it would be close to incorporation. But perhaps more importantly than actually setting one up, I think we should have a very clear idea of what we want to do with it. We've already got a sort of list of business development plans that we want to do. I want to ensure it's realistic. are. So I hope by the time we next meet, we can say, this is our kick and this is what it's going to do for the next 3 to 5 years. I may regret giving myself that.
I mean, you've put it in a high stakes place.
Yeah.
It's being recorded, and other people are going to hear it.
I just say I'm very impatient, so it is possible. And I just want, we're that close. I could almost tell you what our business plan is now, but we're just sort of refining it at the moment. So I think there's a chance. I think, we've got to it's hearts and minds and making sure that everyone's on board and understands and agrees. But I think the way we're talking, I think we're all pretty much on the same page with what we want to do. Achieving it, however, I don't think I'll have done that yet, but at least have a plan.
That's brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much. We've come to the end of the time that we've got available, and I think as with much of the conversations that I've been with all of you over the last few years, it always feels like it's at the beginning of something really, really amazing and really challenging, and hopefully transformational for the communities that you all serve. So if you are up for it, it'd be good to talk again in a couple of months. We can check in. But for now, I think it's time to say goodbye. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.